Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Damien. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, and thank you for asking. And for the listeners, who I've got with me is Michele Gunn. Now, Michelle, she helps professional mums find their inner talents to live fulfilling, purposeful life while building strong relationships. And that's really relevant to the topic we're talking about, what is manly, because, you know, in a mum, well, being a mum, you would obviously have some sort of connection with a guy at some point, and hopefully an ongoing one. And so men are really important in your life as well. From that perspective, I mean, there's a lot of talk out there about men having lost their way, men, feeling more lonely, lost, not useful in society. What is, broadly speaking, let's start broadly and narrow down from there. What have you witnessed in that space?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Men have, I guess, traditional identities have been placed on men, and the world is changing. And I think a lot of men are just having a hard time finding how they fit.
Okay.
So they're, we encourage, well, I do anyway, encourage men to be who they truly are, but they have that inner struggle of who they think society and maybe their close relationships, who they want them to be and who they truly are and who they feel they should be.
Right. So there's a combination of what society is saying they should be and who they feel inside they should be. Is that what you're witnessing?
Yes,
Do you want to
absolutely.
expand a little bit on that as to, from a perspective of, what they feel inside? What do you think that is? And then we'll go into what society now expects.
I know that since traditional roles where men are the breadwinners, they're the caretakers, they're the providers, and women were more looked to being mothers, taking care of the children, that has obviously changed over time.
Yeah.
But I guess we see more about what women can be and should be, and a little bit less about how men can change. And
Okay.
there are some men, I think, who are working out in the relationships where they can have a different role, one that they, both partners feel is appropriate for them and the man fits well. But I think they're also worried about how they're perceived by other men and by society if they don't fulfill the traditional roles. And also, if the women who are coming up and are becoming breadwinners and don't necessarily want to stay home, I think some men might feel displaced.
Right.
They lose their identity.
That's interesting you say that from that perspective. You say how they are perceived by other men if they don't fulfill what's expected of the traditional role. So how do we, from that perspective, and we're taking it back to that traditional role of men are the breadwinners and from that perspective, if they're not being the breadwinner, then they feel that maybe they're not doing their job correctly. Is that, to put that in layman's terms?
And I think it goes deeper than that. Not just
Okay.
doing their job correctly, but they're
Yeah.
losing some of their identity.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So if they don't feel that they're contributing um, to being that breadwinner, or to supporting the family, they feel that they've lost their identity.
And I think that this whole thing with COVID has contributed to that, because there are a lot of people who lost jobs. They've had to take something different. Roles have changed in families because of that, and I think
Mm.
that's made it come up higher to the surface that men have to face that.
It's interesting that you say that, because what I heard from that was not so much that, women had to stay home and look at the family, but men look after the family. But men actually are feeling that they're not contributing for their part, whatever that part might be. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So how do we, from that perspective, and that's an interesting take on it, because a lot of times it's the focus is on, women stay at home at work, but is that common that majority of men would say, "Oh no, the woman has to stay home," or is it more about what we just said, where the men feel that they are not contributing in the way that they feel that they should?
I think I think it probably has more to do with how the men feel.
Mm,
Um, I don't know how society is where you are, but I think it's becoming more accepted that women are not home with the family,
mm.
but it's not as accepted, I think, that men switch roles.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's a good point, because it's certainly from where we are in Australia, it's very similar. I mean, there's a lot of women were in the workforce, certainly, and this is now starting to play through in the sense of in the higher education jobs where you need degrees, because men aren't doing those degrees. There's less men with degrees. Those roles are being filled out more and more by women. So that I read a report earlier this year saying that
Mhm.
the equality, searching for equality in as far as numbers go, in organizations has kind of it's almost taken a 180-degree flip in those higher degree roles, because there isn't the men to fill them. It's like, how do we find the men to fill these roles, because we just don't have the education. So, but coming back to that point of how do they feel. So yeah, so there's a lot of women out there doing those roles, and it's very accepted that women go out to work, and as it should be. But what you're saying is it's not so much
Mhm.
accepted that, from a guy's perspective, that he stays home and looks after the family. Is that what you're pointing towards?
Yes, absolutely. I think that at least as overall as a whole, it's still men are still expected to pull their weight as far as bringing in an income and being there to keep the family stable. And I mean, I almost hate to say it, but it's kind of like, if the woman chooses to work full time, the men must work full
Mm.
time, and then the kids go to daycare or some other alternative. It's not as accepted that the men can choose to stay home and be the stay at home parent.
That's an interesting observation, because it's not one that I've heard really put forward before, but it makes sense from that perspective. Um, because I've thought about that in my lifetime, where, certainly when my son was younger, it was like, I'd love to stay home, but it wasn't really something that it was. Hadn't thought about it from a whether it was societally expected or not, but I thought that'd be really cool, doing, being at home, doing all that kind of stuff. I managed to balance it pretty well with my work and being available, and having
Mhm.
time for my son's school and drop him off, all that kind of thing. And I was quite fortunate to be in a position to do that. But this whole societal expectation, how do you think we would change that, to say, hey, it's okay for a man to do these kind of things?
So, how to change a whole society? That's a great question. I'm
Just
a
the
big
easy questions.
proponent that if you want something, yeah, right. I'm a big proponent for, if you want change to happen, start it.
Yeah.
So if that's something that somebody, yeah, if they want to do it, then be the example. Show people how it
Mm,
can be done, and yeah, and own that. Be
yeah.
proud of it, share it, talk about it, let people know how well it's working.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. And I had a funny experience actually last night. It was kind of in that space with men and behaviors that are expected. I was with my dad, and my dad and I, we hug each other all the time, say love each other all the time. And we're in a bar, and with some of my dad's really old friends, people that he worked with when he was a teenager. And as I was leaving, I went to leave and normally give a hug and I'd sort of, give my dad a pat on the back, but really didn't think much about it. And he goes, "Hey, no, give us a hug." And so I come in and give him a hug, but one of the other guys was like, "Oi, what are you doing?" And it was like my dad turned and said, "No, this is what we do." And it was like just stood, and it was kind of that expectation that we just went, "No, we will, whether you like it or not, whether that's the expectation or not, it's what works for us." So it's interesting. It's kind of ironic that you mentioned that leading by example, because it was like I was going to hug my dad and he was going to hug me regardless of what anyone else said, and it was only one person anyway. But it was like, no, this is our behavior, and we're okay with that. But I love what you said there about this leading by example. So from that perspective, is it simply, if a dad, is it working out as a couple, saying, okay, this is what we want, and rather than being defined by what, say, society takes on board, or what you're seeing on social media and the little posts you get on face page and all those kind of things. Is it a case of just as a couple having that communication and talking to each other and going, okay, this is what works for us and this is what we're going to stand for? Or is that something that we should be more doing?
Yeah, anything you can talk about as a couple will make that relationship stronger. So,
Mm,
absolutely. And not just the communication, but the support. So, being aware that something like a simple hug between father and son in public, especially when they get, when the boys get a little bit older, that's when
mm,
it gets harder to show that affection in public a lot of
mm.
times, that the spouse is there to support that, and that,
Yeah.
it's obvious that, yeah, this is great.
I love that. So that's creating that unity from that perspective as well. Is in like if you're out there as a couple and saying, well, my husband's, or the husband says he's staying home, and someone might say something that both parties together, or even said the woman says, hey, no, this is what we've discussed, and I'm supportive of this, and I think it works for us. Is that the kind of thing you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great example to other people who are too afraid to even talk about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. So part of that is actually having that discussion, just letting people know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love the analogy from the movie Crocodile Dundee. Well, not the analogy, the scene from Crocodile Dundee, where I think I might have mentioned this before. They're talking about a psychologist, and they ask him, "Do you have a psychologist at Walkabout Creek?" And he goes, "No, we just have Wally. If you have a problem, you tell Wally. Wally tells everybody else, and then there's no more problem." Is it really? I mean, because I know there is some issues out there with men identifying what is right for them and feeling lost and lonely and not useful in society. But there's also a lot of men that do feel very useful. They're working through that transition and they're quite comfortable with that transition. Is it a case of let's talk about this more and have those discussions for the people that are lost to see, hey, there's some good role models and examples here?
Yes, as with anything, the more it becomes the norm, the more it will be for everyone to embrace it.
Yeah. So how would we do that, do you think? What do we need to do? Like from your experience, how do you do that in your relationships and the people that you deal with?
Well, on a personal level, I always knew, growing up for me, my dad was definitely the breadwinner.
Mm,
Mom most years stayed home with the kids, and my dad was not one to show emotion.
mm,
I don't think my dad, I don't remember. We'll say that. I don't remember my dad saying, "I love you" till I was an adult, and it shocked me.
Right. Wow.
It shocked me a lot. So that was something that I brought up to my husband, that
Mm,
you will always say that. And as our son was getting older, he was kind of hesitant because his dad never said it to him. And he's like, but we knew. But there's something about hearing the words and saying it that just makes everything even
mm,
more real than just knowing. And
mm.
to not be afraid to do that in front of other people, it just makes the world a better place for everyone.
Yeah, so you said to your husband, "This is what we'll do with your son." Is that so you gave the
Yes.
direction basically. You said
Well, I mean, he agreed, but
Yeah.
it took work for him to feel comfortable. And of course, it's easy when they're little. When they're
Yeah.
little, it's definitely easier. And it's still, it gets to a point when they're in school and you want to hug your kids, especially, I mean, for fathers, I think it's
Mm.
even more so. The kids are like, "Oh, I don't want my friends to see,"
Mm.
because even amongst kids, it's unusual a lot of times, unless they're in a family that really shows that affection.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's interesting that you said that because amongst kids, because it's yeah, that it was be difficult because the kids don't want it. Is that something you would address at home, do you think, to be able to create that? I'm relaying that again from my experience. You know, I remember having a close relationship with my dad when I was younger. I
Mhm.
don't remember my dad ever yelling at me, but I do. I mean, I remember being upset with me, but I don't remember him ever getting angry. Um, and I remember a lot of, fun. I don't recall, big hugs or anything, but I know, and through teenagers, and there was a divorce in there with my parents, and that
Mhm.
affects things. But then after that, I said we have this amazing relationship now, as I just talked about, where we will hug each other, and I'll tell my dad I love him. We don't talk every day, and we don't need to, and we support each other. And it's the same with my son as well. From an early age, it was a case of, you're my son, and it doesn't matter what you do, you'll always be my son, and I'll always love you. And it was a case of always showing, and similar sort of thing. Whenever he goes, out somewhere or something like that, I give him a hug and say goodbye if he's going, overnight or something like that. And I hadn't really thought about it from the perspective of whether other people might or he might be embarrassed by that, because certainly he hasn't expressed anything, but because it was something that we instilled, well, I certainly
Mhm.
instilled from an early age, he's quite comfortable in himself and he's not really worried about what other people think. But that was also something I taught him from a young age. It doesn't matter what other people think, you do what's right for you. Again, does this all come from the home? Do we need to have that more solid home, which Michele.care supports what is manly, and part of that is about creating strong, healthy, inspiring relationships. Do we need to have that more unity at home and allow that to progress out to the world?
I do think that is the case, and I think that's the case for most issues in society, that
Mm,
things need to be handled at home. We need stronger familial relationships in the homes.
mm. So how do we go about doing that? I mean, from your perspective, you obviously have it sounds like you have a good communication relationship with your husband. You can say, okay, this is what we're going to, what I think we should do. And you obviously had a discussion. I was being a little bit facetious about the bossy part. We can have a bit of fun with it too.
Yeah. I mean,
I,
we're both talkers, so we talk about things. I mean, in our when we were dating, we lived a little ways away, so we started talking. That was the biggest thing in the relationship, which is a
mm,
great foundation. And I think anybody who can influence couples, families, children to do that, to communicate in their relationships, to share their feelings,
mm,
to talk about what works, what doesn't work, and to work through problems, I think will make everything stronger, and it will do the ripple effect, right? Like you said, I feel like because of the relationship you had with your father, that helps set a foundation for the relationship you had with your son.
mm.
Most likely when your son, if he has children, he's going to do the same thing. because that's what he knows is normal.
Yeah.
And the more we can do that and spread it, the easier it's going to be for everyone.
I love that. So from that perspective, do you want to take us back to and talk a little bit about, because you mentioned you and your husband, when you were first started dating, you both were talkers and you talked through that. And I think from that that side of things, because when I look at some of the longer term relationships that I had that didn't work out, when I look back at those relationships, the issues were always there at the start. I just chose to ignore them. And if I, the blood was going to the wrong part of my brain, my body, we put it that way. And I'm just wondering from that perspective, if it was a case of, do you want to describe that, of how you created that foundation to be able to have that strong relationship at home that you have? Because it sounds like that. I mean, when I look at a lot of friends that I know, ones that have strong relationships, they set out with that intention first. And if that wasn't right, they didn't continue dating that person and they moved on to someone they actually had that connection with, in the sense they could talk, they fulfill different criteria. So do you want to explain a little bit about that?
It's really quite complex. So, because if we go back to dating, you're looking at people with different personalities. They've been raised different, they've been nurtured different or not nurtured. So there's just so many variables. It's really hard to say. If we're looking at people as adults who are having these issues and they're already in relationships, we can work with the people. I mean, I'm not a counselor, obviously. I'm not a counselor or a psychologist, but to work with the people individually to make sure they have the self-awareness, the self-confidence, and to know what they want, and then to work with the couple together so that each one has a solid foundation within themselves to build a foundation together.
So from that framework of, being manly, when you look at your husband and the process that he went through in setting out that relationship and being part of that communication process, how did that work? When you look at it from that perspective, was he open to talking? You say he was a talker. Was he always a talker, or did you have to pry stuff about him at times? How did that work?
He was always a talker, but not always a share of emotions. Let's say that, right?
Yeah.
So he was taught, like a lot of men, that if you have an emotion, push it down, right?
Yeah.
Ignore it, it'll go away. And of course that causes all kinds of issues. I think, the last time we talked quite a bit about my husband and I's relationship.
Yeah.
And when you are, say, we were together a year and a half before we got married and never lived together. So when we got married, there was still a lot of getting to know you.
Yes.
And he had his way of dealing with anger and stress, and I had my way. And neither way was the right way.
Yes.
Right.
As
so
often
we
is the
had
case.
yeah, so we had to learn to work together. And to do that, you have to communicate. When he would get angry, I think some of the things he was taught was, so that you don't do something you regret, leave the situation. Right. And for me, I saw that as he's walking out, because I had never experienced somebody who just left when they were mad.
Yeah.
So that's something we had to really talk about. And I had to come to the understanding that he needed space. And of course, I still have difficulties with that because that's not the kind of person I am. And and he has to remember, yes, he needs his space and his time, but he's just, don't leave. He might have to remind me, give me some time, leave me alone. But we've learned to work that out. And I think that men need to be able to have a place to communicate with their significant other, and also friends to talk to about dealing with their emotions, so that they can do it in a positive way.
And is that something, like, from a man's perspective, when you look at your husband, is it a case where, he has his conversations with you, and then said sometimes he needs to have that space, and other times he might have conversations with other people. Is it part of that framework of being manly, just going, this is what I need, and saying, sharing that in a kind way, but saying, hey, I might need some space now, and I'll be back. I just need some space.
Absolutely. But it's the communication.
Mm.
So that everybody knows what's going on. You don't ever want to give up who you are. You might have to, make some modifications, but you don't want to give up who you are. After all, we fell in love with the person for who they are.
Yeah. So it's really what you're talking about there. It sounds like from your perspective, if you're asking what is manly, part of that framework is being clear about who you are.
Yes.
Yeah. From your perspective, when you look at your husband, if you were to analyze that, and we're not going to quiz him on whether you're right or wrong, but was that something that he was relatively confident about, or is it something he was still finding out when you first got together?
I think, well, I know what he would say. He would say he was definitely confident in who he was.
Yeah.
I think, like most people, because we were together in our early 20s, that we both still had a lot of finding out who we were.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Yeah.
interesting. All right. We're getting short of time here. We're going to have to cut off for the radio listeners. But it sounds like from that perspective, part of this framework is one, knowing who you are. Framework for being a man, but it applies to both genders, I think. But we're focusing on the men. That is, one, knowing who you are, and two, having the confidence to say, this is what I need in this moment.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I don't, because I'm a little bit older now, I'm not sure how the younger generations feel, but I know a lot of people my age and older, the men just weren't raised to do that. They were raised to keep things to themselves and not, they fit the roles that they were told to fill. And I think some of that still goes on today, and that a lot of men have difficulty with that.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll continue that discussion in the long form of the podcast. For the radio listeners, thank you for joining us. We're going to have to cut off here, and we'll hopefully see you on the other side in the podcast. And we will continue. So from that perspective, as you say, they weren't taught like that. And was your husband, similar sort of thing in talking with him? Was his dad very similar in that case, not showing emotion, that kind of thing?
I think he did, but when he got older, I think he softened like a lot of us do.
Yeah.
I think he softened and start. His dad, I think, had a very tender heart, but when he was a young man, and in middle age, he had a very tough outer shell.
Yeah. Do you think that was part of, they had to have a tough outer shell? They had to have that stoic, not show feelings and that just to survive? Part of that, the nature of where they grew up?
Yes, and I think it's also was an expectation. That's the way men were supposed to be.
Yeah. So from that side of things, you said your husband was a little bit like that as well. It didn't initially show emotions so much. How did he make that transition? How do you, if you were to look at it and say, well, how did he make that transition to showing, well, I'm guessing some emotion?
I wore him down. Yeah.
Is that what it takes? A loving woman, or a loving, if we, for the people that are same sex, it's like the feminine to wear him down, to wear the masculine down.
Right. It took a lot of talking. I think reflection. Also, we talk about, the relationship he had with his father. We talk about the relationship I have with my father. We talk about the kids and, what do you want? What do you want for your children? What kind of relationship do you want to have with your kids?
Yeah.
And how do you get there? Right. Yeah. And it's so much easier to start when they're young. So it took time. And sometimes now he still gets angry at me for helping him to find his emotions.
We don't. I don't think anyone wants that gender. Doesn't matter which gender. We don't like being helped in most cases, but we want to find our own way. But from that side of things, do you think? Because I had an experience where we were filming, doing some filming, getting some snapshots. We had a little dinner party, and we had two psychologists asking questions, and we had people from strong families, and a split of the genders there. And we had more people than there were seats. So we'd rotated people in, and it was intentionally like that. But I got concerned as I was directing it because there was a lot of the men started doing a lot of the talking. And coming from a corporate background, I was getting worried that, the men are dominating the conversation. And so I asked the ladies off camera, I said, look, I said, I'm a bit concerned because the men are starting talking or doing all the talking. I want to kind of shift that back a little bit because I'm a bit worried about that. And they all stood up, all the women stood up and said, no, we never hear men talking about this. And I was thinking about that going, well, actually, so that what that's showing is that in the right environment, in a safe space, men will
Mhm.
talk about that. Is that part of what this is creating a safe space where men can talk about that, whether it's societal or in the home?
Yes, yes, absolutely. They just like, I mean, like any person, a man needs to feel that he will not be ridiculed. He will not be, well, he won't be made to feel less than. So absolutely a
Mm,
safe space.
I love that.
Yeah.
Won't be made to feel less than. Is that, from your perspective, is that how you kind of wore him down? You gave him this safe space as well where he could open up from your experience, do you think?
I like to think so.
How do you do that? Like I mean, let's put societal aside. How do you do that from because I was looking at that as you were talking, thinking about that experience I relayed just before about my dad and where we gave each other a hug, and the gentleman said, "Oh, what are you doing?" Um, Even though he said that, and maybe that wasn't a safe space. So there's a combination of both. We were like, we don't care what you think anyway. But that's a different mindset. So maybe that's something we deal with separately. How do you go about creating this safe space for for a person to open up? I don't think it just is men, but we're focusing on men, but would also apply to children as well, I would imagine.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of it's going to depend on the specific person that you want to open up.
Yeah,
So you really have to know their personality, how they think, how they feel, because I think there will be some people that if you give them the opening and just let them know it's safe, they'll just pour out.
yeah,
And there are some that it'll take some coaxing. It'll happen over time.
mm,
And just being very supportive and encouraging, and a lot of times maybe it'll definitely need to start like in private.
yeah.
Let's, asking simple questions where that maybe that brings out some feelings that aren't usually there. um,
Mm. Is it a
yeah.
case of, because I look at it with my son, and there's sometimes where when I drop him off or pick him up from school, we've got a little bit of a drive to get home, so we've got a bit of time where we're stuck in the car together, which can have its advantages.
Hmm.
Um, but I notice sometimes I'll ask him about his day, and he won't really want to be talking much. And so I don't press it. I just go, okay, cool, and we listen to music, and then sometimes he opens up and then starts talking about it. But I kind of I don't push it. Is that something you need to have? Is it more about? And when I say listening skills, I'm not saying just sitting there listening, but actually paying attention to what's going on in the moment. Say, hey, maybe I need to just pull back a bit and give that person space.
Hmm. You absolutely let him know that it was okay to share,
Mm,
and you let him know it was okay not to if he didn't feel like it. So
mm,
he knew it was safe. So
yeah,
when he felt ready, he did.
yeah.
So yeah, that's and of course the old saying, we have two ears and one mouth. We're supposed to do twice as much listening than talking. So being available to listen, I mean, we have to be available to listen. People can't open up if they have nobody to open up to.
Is that the case of when if we're creating a safe space, we're creating a space where they can do it, share on their terms, as opposed to what we should be expecting of them?
Yes. Yeah. That's what makes people feel comfortable. Nobody wants to be forced to say things that they don't feel comfortable to say.
Because I often see that where people will, and I've done that myself before in the past as well, where you know, come on, give me an answer, tell me what's going on, and it's like
Yes.
I want to know, and it creates a bit of a wedge. But like what you're saying, it's not really a safe place. If you're being demanding, that's kind of not really a safe place to share. It's almost being ridicule's not the right, but maybe even feel like you're being judged by if someone's being really pushy or.
Yeah, or what will the outcome be? What if I give this answer? What will
Mm.
happen? If I give a different answer, what will happen?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. What will the outcome be? Because I know, when as you said that, a couple of times in other relationships that I've had in the past, where I knew if I said something, it was going to cause an argument,
Mhm.
and so you don't say anything because you don't want to go there. Um,
And you
that's
know
really
women don't forget. Women don't forget.
well, that's why
So
men
you
don't
have to
remember.
be
Because why
careful.
should two
Yeah.
people remember everything he's done wrong? But from that perspective, it is. I mean, what will the outcome be? Of that's really powerful because when you're thinking about that, it's you. If you're wanting to open up and you're worried about what that outcome's going to be, that's again not a safe space, is it?
Correct.
How do you do that? How does someone who, I mean, because I would suggest most people are doing this because they care. They want the information because they care. I listen to
Mhm.
mums all the because my son, you know, he's friends boys. He goes to a boys' school, and I listen to a lot of the mums, you know, talking about how they don't talk and he doesn't talk to me, and sometimes I'll see them pushing the child for an answer, and it's and I'm just wondering, do we need to have that self discipline to sit back and go, okay, I just need to give that space rather than trying to force this outcome.
Yes, and I know for me that's very hard to when I really want to know something, it's hard to step back,
Yeah.
but to have the best outcome for the person who's going to be sharing, you need to let them share in their time.
Yeah. And that's dealing with a young boy. So I mean, I guess that's probably really important for the development of a young boy is to hey say, hey, you have the space to say what's right for you to share or not. And I was because I'm thinking as you were talking about that and we're going through this with my son, it was very much like that where I never really pressed him for information. I was there for him when if he wanted to open up. And I'm as much as I was concerned as well, what's the difference between a man and a woman in that regard, do you think? Because I was quite comfortable stepping back and giving him his own space to the point where sometimes where I'd given him advice and
Mhm.
to stop him hurting himself, and I'm speaking metaphorically here, but doing something that was going to be detrimental to him, and he wasn't listening, so I just let him go. And he did, and then he failed big time. And then I was there and said, "Okay, what did you learn from that?" But I don't often see mums doing that. It's more, you know, it's trying to protect them from harm. Is that more a motherly instinct and we need to and in the development of young boys, we need to, as a mum, step back a little bit?
Wow, as a mom of a boy, I don't know I could do that. But sometimes I mean, sometimes people in general, and I'm sure boys especially, and a lot of men
Mm,
need to make that mistake or have that fail to actually learn what they need to learn so it doesn't happen again or to
mm.
do it better next time. So,
'Cause I
yeah.
mean, as a parent, you want to be, you know, protective and care and your children not to be experiencing harm,
Mhm.
which I get, and I certainly feel that with in respect of my son. But sometimes, and it, you know, so the experiences where he was not going to be in physical danger, so it was like, okay, you're going to fall over. You were
Yeah.
given some examples and given advice, and you've decided not to do that, and that's fine. Off you go, and
Yeah.
yeah, I
It
mean, the
it and if we're always there to protect them and catch them, they never learn what not to do. They're always gonna be looking for somebody to save them.
And that's exactly that's what I'm wondering
Mhm.
from that perspective of, because I've heard it mentioned before that there's an overly protectiveness of men and not allowing them to get out there and fail. It's, everyone gets a participation trophy and all that kind of stuff. And it's like we don't get that experience of, hey, this is a fail. You need to step up and just be you, whatever that is. I'm not saying it, but just to have that experience of finding yourself and standing up for what's right for you. Like my dad did it. He just said, he's the one that turned to the guy and said, hey, piss off. I can hug my son if I want to. And is that part of what we need to have this development for young boys, is to give them that space to fall over?
Yes, that it's funny that you bring up the everybody gets a participation trophy. That's something my husband really does not like. They started that here when my kids were small,
Yeah.
and everybody cannot be the best.
Mm.
And we don't want everybody to be the best because everybody's different. So
Mm.
allowing the boy to grow and develop at who he's supposed to be by failing, by getting something wrong, will make him a better man, I think, because he'll know what his strengths are and he can focus in the areas where he's strongest.
Yeah, so it's a combination of both of those, isn't it? It's going, okay, you can fail, and you're a good person, and let's find your path. You
Yes.
find your path. I'm here to support you finding that path, not to find it for you or to prevent you from finding it.
Right. Right.
So what was your husband's? Because it sounds like from that perspective, he was quite strong on that, finding your children finding their own path. Is that fair to say? I'm sure you both are, but I'm just trying to understand from your husband's perspective.
Well, I can say that if we had our kids now, because we know so much more now, we would do things a little bit differently.
Life should be lived in reverse, shouldn't it? We've got the experience.
Yeah, because we all know what's best for our kids even when we don't, but we think we do.
Yeah.
So and seeing some of the decisions that they make as adults and seeing their different strengths, because as our kids are growing up and going through school, they have such limited experiences with things that it's hard for them to choose the right path. Um, that's, you hear about kids who go to college and they keep changing their major and people get upset because but it's because they don't know, because they haven't experienced anything.
Yeah.
How can you find what you truly love and what you're best at if you don't try different things?
No, that's a very good point, because I look at that from my own experience. And when I was younger, I did all these different things. I put it down to, I'm not a star sign person, but I am a Leo and I'm also a rat. So I like shiny things. So I go, oh, shiny thing over there. And so I jump over there and go, oops, that's fire. Get out, get out. But it was part of that was having that experience to go, okay, I learned that and that didn't work for me, or this did, and I like that component. So do you think that, I mean, and I'm going to use the term helicopter parent, is that creating is that detrimental to boys becoming men because they're not finding their own way? They're not falling over and going, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that. I think part of the reason I am the way I am is because I did fall over a lot, and I mean a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been accused of being a helicopter parent, so I can really speak on that. So, luckily I did, I had my husband, who was definitely not a helicopter parent, to help balance the situation, because there were situations that my son was in that as a mother, I just wanted to go protect him and make things better.
Yeah.
And my husband's like, no, leave him be. He
Yeah.
needs to learn, get up, and do what he needs to do. So, yeah, the term helicopter parent, there's good parts to it. There's parts when it can come in handy, but
Yeah.
it can definitely be detrimental if it does not let the young man, the boy, do what he needs to do to become who he needs to become.
Yeah. I love what you said there about because I think it's really important to have that caring, and it's a combination of both, isn't it? Where you've got the mum's got this extra caring and always wants to be there. The dad's, in that, and we're talking stereotypical roles here for,
Right.
and I'm sure someone's going to complain, and that's okay. I won't read the comment. But from that perspective, but is it about whether, not saying which is right, but using that as the gender norm, is, you have this extra caring, this empathy, which women generally have a higher level of empathy, whereas the man, as you said, your husband was no, let him fall over, because he needs to learn from that, and you have a nice balance there. From that, you find that nice middle ground. Is that really how it works to create a nice framework for raising a young boy?
I mean, if the balance isn't always already there, yes, definitely. The best case scenario is that it already exists, but
Yeah.
I think that's probably not as
Optimistic
common.
to think, yeah.
Yeah, and as far as stereotypical, absolutely, there could be reverse roles, and I think in
Mm.
some families, there may be too much of one and not enough of the other also, which causes problems.
Yeah, I've certainly seen the other side of it where, the woman has been very much, "No, go get up and do that," and the dad's been more, "Okay, it's okay, it's
Mhm,
relax." So yeah, it's not a gender thing, but it's anyway. But from that, the point of that is again having this. If we're setting a framework for being manly and developing young men, it's having this ability to find themselves and to, because I did that with my son as well from an early age. I read a report that said, and they interviewed people that were really excelled, your Steven Spielbergs, those kind of things, and they were trying to
mhm,
work out what was it. Was there a common factor between? And so many people they interviewed, and they went through all these different variables, and I think it was about, they got to 240. It was, or 280. I can't remember the exact number, but all these different variables, and none of them lined up. And then they finally found one that was common through all of the people. And what it was, and it was usually the parent of the opposite sex, not always, but usually the parent of the opposite sex, had this unwavering belief in the child's ability at a young age. So before the age of 5, which meant, like, what they meant was, if the child said, "I want to be an astronaut," the parent would have said, "You're going to be the best astronaut ever." And just had this unbelievable belief in the child's ability. And it wasn't about whether the child's career would come through or not, or would come into fruition. It was the parents' belief in the child's ability to do what they set themselves. And that's what
mhm.
set the difference. And that's where, from my perspective, from my son's point of view, it was always, one, taught him to like himself. And that's come back through school. Is the school have often said he goes his own way, he's confident in his own thing. Is it a combination of that, as we're developing young men, is to, one, get them to like themselves, and encourage them to like themselves for who they are, and to give them that ability to to believe in themselves to make their own decisions.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
If they don't like themselves, they're not going to do anything to help further, right? They're going to lose interest. Well, I don't deserve it. I'm undeserving.
Mm,
So they definitely have to like themselves. And that unwavering support,
mm.
I mean, who wouldn't excel in a situation like that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would absolutely. And like you say, they can still fail, they can still try new things and fail, but they still have that support that yes, you can do it. They
yeah,
can change the way they do it and a make little moderations or something and still have that support. They'll keep
yeah,
trying.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just love that, and this creation, giving them the freedom to make their own decisions, because that's coming back to what you were talking about, with you and your husband, is, when he needed some space, he could say, "I need some space,"
Mhm.
and add that tagline, "I will be back." Just, I remember when I first got married, the pastor had said, "Keep your tool shed. Men need a tool shed. So you need a space to go to." He said if more men had tool sheds, divorces wouldn't be so high.
It depends if the woman chases them out there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Just keep the sharp implements away. Keep them locked up. Um, but from that side of things, it seems to be this ability to give the person that freedom, that safe space. Because we're coming back to, should men express emotions, and it sounds like men will express I mean, if we give them that same space, they can be coaxed out. It's kind of like this little animal that you got to coax out with a little bit of
Mhm.
bread. Come on, it's okay, come out, that kind of thing. And I know that sounds facetious, but it really sounds like what needs to be to help this framework of being manly. It's not just turning to the man and saying, "Hey, you need to express emotions," but if he opens up and you beat him with a hammer because he's opened up,
Right.
it's not going to create that environment, is it?
Right. Absolutely. And if we can start while they're boys and teach them
Mm.
that, it'll be even easier for them.
Yeah, I love that. So, is there so from that side of things, do you think it's that will also help them give them purpose? Because when we talk about young boys and even men, some men just don't seem to have a purpose. When you look at your husband, for example, what was did he seem to have a purpose? I mean, I know that's an attractive quality, so I'm guessing that's a rhetorical question that someone having a purpose that you're not. But did that stand out for you? And was he aware of his purpose? Did it develop or?
Well, I think that his purpose was absolutely wrapped in his role as a man
Mhm.
and how he served his family. I think his family
Right.
is his purpose and his role. So I
Even when you
believe
were
last time we.
early dating, was that that stood out that he wanted to be a family man and he wanted
Oh
to
yeah.
contribute to a family. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
I'm guessing that was attractive. Again, for a rhetorical
Yeah, it
question.
was. We definitely had that in common. Yeah.
So was that when he was that where do you think that come from? Have you had that discussion with him as to his that purpose of wanting to be the family man, do you think? Have you had that
I
discussion?
We have not had that discussion at
Hmm.
all. Um
It was just there from your
it's
perspective, it was there, you didn't need to know more. It was like, it was there.
That's right. It worked for me, so it was good. Yeah.
Yeah. What about beyond the family? I mean, we go, okay, well, there's a number of different things we can do, in our life and ways that we can help out and give back. Obviously there's a providing for the family, which is giving back as well. What about that from a broader perspective about, men having a purpose of something that they're passionate about? Is that important?
It's very important. I mean, as long as we keep using my husband as an example.
As long as it's not gonna get
Um
you in trouble. So
no, it's not gonna give me my family knows that they are my examples anytime I can use them. So, but because that's who I am. But when he became disabled and he was no longer the main breadwinner,
Mm,
that's hard because that was his identity. So he's working on finding, well, he's got a new purpose, not
mm.
necessarily the main breadwinner now. It's something he's working towards because that was ingrained in him by his father that that's your job. Um, but he is finding some some other ways to utilize his skills and talents to give him a purpose other than providing financially for his family.
So how did that impact you, and how do you guys talk about that? So when he became disabled and he said he couldn't do that anymore and his identity was, rocked, how did you guys handle that?
I'm sure he might have a different answer.
Mm,
From my perspective, it's pretty simple. I think that, we're a partnership and
mm.
he was there supporting the family for, I'm going to say, the first half of our marriage because I'm assuming we have just as long to go. But that,
I'm sure you probably got
that,
a lot longer. So
yeah, that, it only makes natural sense that I'm going to do what I need to do to keep us going where we want to go. And that
yeah.
it's still the same partnership. Our roles haven't totally changed,
Mm,
just maybe the paycheck amounts have changed. But
yeah.
we're still equals in our partnership. So
How did he go with that, do you think? I mean, did you talk about that where you say the paycheck amounts changed? How did his ego, or how did he adjust to that? Did he have to adjust to that, or was it a safe environment where it was okay?
I think he's still adjusting. I think it's still I think it's still hard for him. Because like I said, that was what was ingrained in him. So I think that's still hard for him to deal with, but it's not as hard as it used to be.
Yeah. How do you think he adjusted to that? What do you think has helped that adjustment?
Well, I hope I had something to do with it.
I'm pretty sure you did.
I mean, we talk about it, we talk about our roles.
Mm,
We talk about it's more, I think our relationship is more about how we're there for each other and how we want
mm.
to move forward rather than how the money comes in the house.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
how you're
unless
there.
there's no money, that's
Yeah.
another issue. But as long as, things are getting taken care of, it's more you still have the partnership. It's just a little different, but it's still the partnership.
'Cause you said how you want to move forward. Is that the
Mhm.
attitude that your husband has as well?
I think so. I think he has a vision for how he wants to see how he's going to carry out, like you said, his purpose. So
Mm,
he is working towards that.
yeah.
So it's definitely and we do have conversations, of course, how we want to move forward. Our kids are having kids,
Mm,
what we want our future to look like and how we're going to be involved in their lives and our grandchildren's lives. And if we're old enough, or if we're around when we're old enough to have great grandchildren, how we'll be involved in their life,
mm.
and the same thing, where do we want to live when we're older? What do we want our daily routines to look like? Always communication,
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
that's come up so many times, the word communication. But and the
Mm,
part that I heard there as well was this part about moving forward, and I'm connecting that to purpose because with a purpose, really, that is about moving forward. Do you think that's really important from a man's perspective to have this focus forward?
I do, because without a purpose, who are you?
Yeah, because that's interesting that that's a really profound statement actually. Without a
Mm,
purpose, who are you?
mhm.
Got to write that down. And was that like from that perspective, your husband's how he was fulfilling his purpose has changed because of disability? Is that something that it's again focusing forward? Do you think helped him find a different way?
Yes, because, well, I mean, when things change that drastically in your life, you have two, well, maybe three options. Just kind of fall and
Mm,
do nothing, fall backwards and things get worse, or
yeah.
fall forward, right?
Mm,
So the best outcome is to look forward and to see what you can do to move forward.
mm. And has that always been his attitude to continue to look forward as much as something might be really traumatic? To go, okay, how do we move forward from here?
I don't think I don't think that's always his attitude because, men, like most people, we have down times.
Mm,
Sometimes things just hit us bad, but when you have someone else there to help pick you up and help encouraging you, it makes it easier to get back up and move forward again.
it sounds like it's a combination of both, isn't it? It's this you don't need to be this entirely stoic person all by yourself. You actually need to be a partnership, but you also need to have
Mhm.
yourself sorted out as a whole person first as well. So is that about right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Is it, I mean, from that perspective of finding, who you are, like from a man's perspective, when you look at your children as well and how they've found who they are, is it again that exploration process of having that freedom to go out and try things and learn from things? Do you think that's really important?
I think that's very important, but I think it's also important that we remember that we're always a work in progress.
Mm,
And I don't think any one person is always going to totally know themselves because we're ever changing and ever growing.
that's a good
But
point.
yeah, we need to have a foundational understanding of who we are and who we want to be.
Because do you think that's part of the problem too? People expecting to have that they should have the answer when you, as you say, it's a work in progress.
Yes, because how awful do you feel when you think you should have the answer and you don't?
Mm.
And then you go on social media and everybody else seems to have the answer.
Yeah, but that's all plastic and BS.
Yep, it sure is.
That's my opinion. Sorry,
It's absolutely
maybe there's some
true.
truth out there, but is that case of, you know, from that perspective of, do men really need to understand that it's okay to not know?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I mean, I love what you're talking about there. We're ever changing and ever growing. We're a work in progress. And oftentimes we look at it, and that's going to come back to that Wally example from Crocodile Dundee. Oftentimes we will think, and especially if you're looking at social media, because you're not having that interactive conversation, you're just looking at, you know, what photo isn't airbrushed on social media now. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, people projecting all this stuff, but then when you look deeper, it's like, hang on a minute, they haven't done any of this. Um,
Right. How many people post the crappiest day they have on social media because they want everybody to know, right? Nobody says, "Well, my kid just flunked out of school." No, you only see, right? Oh, they made the honor roll. They made the dean's list, right? You don't see all the other stuff.
yeah. Is that something, I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. I struggled with that from the perspective of, and as a mum, I'm gonna see you cringe as I tell this story, with my son, because I know you're a protective mum and you want things, you know, best for your children. With my son, I asked him about, we were talking about school and asked him, you know, why he went to did he know why he went to school? And we went through that process of explaining that, you know, you go to school to get the education to earn money, and then in wanting him to have his own, make his own decisions, I asked him, "What grades do you want to get?" Now, when he didn't say A plus, and I know I can see it in your face. You're going, and for me, it was like I didn't say anything, and he said the grade that he wanted. The irony was, because he wasn't at that grade. I mean, it was still a high grade, but it wasn't the highest. But the irony was he actually achieved that and then pushed past it and started getting A pluses as well. But he did it on his own behalf without me pushing him, and I don't have to remind him to do homework or anything. He does it all by himself and sorts it out, which was an interesting fact. But it was. Do we need to? The point of that was coming back to, do we need to take this perfection out of it and say, hey, you know, to look at it, you know, you don't have to be a billionaire to look after your family, to have enough money to enjoy things with your family. Do we need to have
Right.
that element of going, hey, what do we want?
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. And you can take that a couple steps forward. So when you go to the doctor, you have no idea what grade point average that doctor graduated medical school with.
That's a
You
good
just know
point.
they had to pass,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Yes. So the same thing with everything. And I have 3 kids. I had 2 kids who knew what
yeah,
they needed to do to pass.
yeah.
And they weren't necessarily, they felt good when they had better grades, but if they didn't feel like putting forth the effort, they knew they didn't need to pass.
Mm,
So, and when we look at how well someone does, our boys, we look at the report cards and everybody wants the top grade. And then, we have the highest grade, we have the lowest grade, we have average. For some reason, there's something wrong with being average.
mm.
And everybody can't be at the top and everybody can't be at the bottom, right?
Then
There's
everyone will be
more
average.
people, right? Right. There's more people in between. And they were talking on the radio this morning. They were talking about that. When you look at report cards, it doesn't matter how many good grades are on the card. The parents' eyes always go to the lowest one.
Ah,
Yeah, we're all ingrained to look for what's wrong and what they're doing wrong
yeah.
instead of, wow, you did so good at, you're so talented at, and
Mm,
encourage them to do that. And that's who they are. That'll help them find their purpose, their calling. It'll help them to be the person they were meant to be if we look at what they naturally do well, and encourage that.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially I think for young men as well
Mhm.
to actually the focus is what did you do right, as opposed to, oh, you did this wrong. If you want to, especially if you want them to make their own decisions, it's, the whole guilt shame thing is pretty detrimental, especially for a guy, I would imagine. I'm sure for both,
Mhm.
but we're talking about guys here. So
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So how do you, I mean, is that simply again a case of shifting your focus as a parent, or even in yourself, finding, this is what I like about me, or this is what I've done very well.
Yes. As parents, we can definitely start instilling that in our boys and the
Mm,
young men. And as men, men should do that. Absolutely. Look at what they do well, what they do right. Remind themselves when there's nobody else reminding them, they need to remind themselves.
I love that. What did you do right? And I do. I mean, from my perspective, I made that shift a long time ago. When I go to bed at night, I look through my day and go, what did I accomplish today? What was, and even if I didn't do something, I went, doesn't matter. What did I accomplish? And that's what I
Hmm.
go to bed thinking about. And as a result, I feel great about my day because I'm focusing on all the things that I did do, and that becomes my priority. Because often, and this is probably because I'm an anally retentive, um, I was when I was young, I think I was would have been 18 or 19. I was getting I was complaining because I was getting all the red lights as I was driving, and and for whatever reason, I asked the question, "Am I really?" So I started counting and making notes of the amount of red lights I was getting. And it turned out that I was getting many more green lights, so it was just the red lights were standing out more because I was frustrated. So do we need to have that shift and just like you say, it's focusing on what's there because there's so many wonderful opportunities which will help better develop boys into being men.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the same thing about when you talk about having a positive mindset, right?
Mm,
Whatever your focus is on is what you see more of.
mm,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's wonderful. From that side of things, because we've actually covered a lot of detail here. I've got 3 pages of notes already. And I love the depth that you bring to the conversation, Michelle. It's wonderful.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything else we wanna add to that as a framework? Because we've got we've covered a lot of detail, which I'll put in the show notes, but, anything
Yeah,
else you
I
think?
think yeah, I think the most important thing for men is that they really need to know who they are and to be comfortable with
Ooh,
who they are. Yeah, regardless of what other people say. And sometimes they just need to maybe look for that support group so that they have the support that they need to be who they are. Sometimes we're not drawn to the right people, right?
oh, okay.
Yeah, so you want to make sure your friends
Mm.
appreciate you for who you are and will encourage you to be a better person.
I love that. And how would you identify that as a not I mean, as a man or even as a boy? How being appreciated, what does that feel like, or what should people look out for?
I well, if having a conversation with your friends afterwards, you feel like you've just been beat up, you need new friends for sure, right? You want people who will listen. You want people who have positive suggestions. And I know that a lot of times men will joke around and be harder on each other,
Mm,
but to have the opportunity to actually be real with each other, I think is very important.
yeah, I think there is something in that where you can have that jesting because I had the same experience and use my son as that example because with some male friends we catch up and play poker and we're very male in that we will bag the crap out of each other.
Mhm.
And I think my son first came and played when he was 11 or 12, and joined the group. And I was initially I was part of that too, going, okay, how's he going to handle this? Um, and to be fair, my son's 6 foot, so he's not at
Oh,
that. So he looks a lot older than he is, and people didn't realize how young he was. And when the sledging started, and he got sledged a bit, and he just threw it straight back. he had no hesitation, and it was fun. As a dad, I was sitting there going, "Oh, this is cool." But it was kind of fun where we could have that again, it was a safe environment where it was
Mhm.
friendly banter and friendly, sledging. Nothing, it wasn't, yeah, it was friendly, just jibing each other. And
Mhm.
it was interesting to see his development in that safe space where he could do that and feel good about that. But like you're saying, if you're in a situation where you walk out of that conversation, you feel like you've been beat up, then maybe you need better friends or different friends, might be the better way to put it.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, from that perspective, what do you think it is there where people will hang around with people that aren't serving them when I'm saying serving them, not beating them up emotionally?
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to do with the self-value, that there is a lack
Mm.
of self-value. They don't feel deserving of something better.
Ah. And how does someone, bring that up as in, from their own perspective? Is it, how do you go decide that you're going to have a higher value for yourself?
That's a great question.
It's one I've been
I'm
struggling with for a
I'm
long time.
yeah, I'm not sure the correct answer. I think there has to be something that naturally happens internally,
Mm,
or there has to be someone that they truly trust and feel safe around who can bring that up.
yeah, because I've wondered how do you do that? Because it's the old saying, you can lead a horse to water. Um,
Mhm.
and from that perspective, there's people who see where they allow themselves to be trampled on all the time, and as much as you tell them, they continue to do that, and it's exhaust. I've got close friends like that where I've it was exhausting to get them to turn around. Took a lot of effort and it was very draining. And even then, they'd keep bouncing back, and it took a long time before they actually did. Um, and it's something I've wondered with how do you help someone to have that to value themselves? Um,
I think for me, in a coaching scenario, it comes to a point where I actually work with the person to discover or uncover
mm,
what's right about them, right? What their talents are, where they've had
yeah,
successes, and get them to truly see their value. Because sometimes people are told way too much over and over what they're lacking, that they believe that rather than what is good about them. So in a coaching perspective situation, we would work on that, getting them
mm,
to recognize and to really own their value.
yeah. I love that. We uncover what is right about you.
Mhm.
Um, and is that because, I mean, from my understanding, a belief is just something that you've repeated over and over again. And so if you don't believe that your value, it's because you've someone may have said it to you, but you've actually started to repeat it in your mind. And is it as simple as that? And for my, is it, yeah, as simple as that is just simply repeating something different and saying, okay, as you said, uncover what's right about you, and then just reminding yourself constantly about what's right about you until that becomes the habit and the primary thought process.
Yes. And an exercise that I like to use with my clients, I work mostly with women, but I have worked with men, and it may make some men uncomfortable and some it will not, but actually to do mirror talk, right? To
Yeah.
use the affirmations in front of a mirror,
Mm,
things that um, you like about yourself, and it can't be something that involves somebody else, right?
mm,
Not like, well, I always help so and so, because that's not about you, that's about another person.
that's a good
So
point.
something, yeah, something that's about yourself, and
Yeah.
actually look at yourself in the eye and say them. Say
Yeah.
the words, say the phrases, and in the beginning, definitely morning and night. Some
Mm.
people might need it more, but till you actually start believing it, because sometimes you have to convince yourself.
Yeah, so it's just that process of going through it and reminding yourself. I mean, from my perspective, and I forget how much work that I went into. to me developing me, and I started at a very early age. But one of those processes was making a recording of affirmations like that, and then putting it under my pillow and playing it on repeat over throughout the night. That had an impact because it started to change how I thought about myself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It's that process again of being manly is circling back to this whole point of your own purpose and who you are, knowing who you are, but
Mm-hmm.
knowing who you are in a good way, because everybody has things that are right about themselves. What about from the perspective of and take it from a female perspective when you're looking at a man? Because there used to be, certainly, and maybe not so much now, but it certainly had this perception of man. There was that action hero type thing. Whereas I've got a lot of friends who are, as men, they're quite effeminate, but they're very confident in who they are. Is that masculine thing, connected to, that look, or is it more to do with something else that's more to do with confidence and how a person thinks about themselves and their liking of themselves?
I think self-confidence goes a long way. Someone who's assured of themselves is very manly,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, so because as I said, the friends of mine that are effeminate, they're very confident. They
Mm-hmm.
might be effeminate, but I consider them very manly in that regard. They're quite confident in who they are, and they're very confident in who they are, and they know where they're going. From that side of things, so we've covered a lot of detail there. If we were going to sum it up, if you were to sum it up, this what is manly as a framework for being manly, what would you say the key things that a young boy should focus on, or a man should focus on, in being manly?
Definitely knowing who they are and being confident in who they are.
Yeah, love that. It's simple, isn't it? Really, when you think about
Yes, it is.
it.
Right. And they have to understand that every man is different, every boy is different. So don't do the comparisons to others. Be confident in who you are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it says it all there, confident in who you are, not who you think you should be. That's not the statement.
Mhm.
I love that. Michele, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. So much insights there. Thank you very much for being on the show. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, Damien. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.